I had grown used to the quiet. It wasn't a dramatic loneliness, not the kind that eats away at your ribs in the dark or makes your hands shake from the absence of touch. It was the soft, settled kind, like dust on bookshelves or the way the floor creaks at the same time every night. My apartment reflected it. Clean surfaces, muted colors, neatly folded blankets, a coffee mug always placed in the exact same spot on the counter. I didn't mind the silence. In fact, I curated it. My days were long and tightly packed, filled with back-to-back meetings, rapid emails, buzzing phones, and polite nods through glass conference rooms. When I came home, I wanted everything to slow down. I wanted to disappear into a world where no one expected anything from me. Benji was the only exception, my golden retriever, my companion in routine, in solitude, in stillness. He greeted me at the door each evening, tail thudding against the wall like a soft drum, tongue lolling out, eyes full of uncomplicated joy. His needs were simple: food, walks, affection. He didn't ask me questions or demand explanations. He just was. His presence filled the corners of my apartment in a way no one else's ever had. He followed me from room to room like a shadow made of fur and breath and warm, steady loyalty. I talked to him sometimes, more often than I should probably admit, but it wasn't conversation I craved. It was contact. Soft, familiar, safe. Lately, though, I had begun to feel the edges fray. My work hours stretched longer, my energy thinned. I found myself skipping our morning walks, standing at the window with a coffee I didn't finish, watching the world outside blur past while Benji paced restlessly by the door. Guilt layered over exhaustion. I knew he needed more than I could give him, and the realization sat heavily in my chest, stubborn and quiet. So one night, after another late dinner eaten over my laptop, I opened a local listing site and posted a simple request. Dog walker needed, mornings and evenings, experience preferred. I didn't think much of it. It felt like outsourcing something small, delegating a sliver of responsibility to someone with more free time and more energy. I told myself it was practical, that I was being a good pet owner, that it had nothing to do with the silence that had begun to feel louder lately, echoing through the apartment in the early mornings when the sun painted pale gold on the floors, and I lay there, awake, listening to nothing. The message came in the next morning, short, clear, with a profile picture attached. She looked young, confident, the kind of smile that felt unbothered and honest. Her name was Alex. She offered to come by that same day to meet Benji. I agreed without thinking, my fingers moving faster than my brain. And then I waited, pacing between the window and the hallway mirror, trying not to look like I was waiting. When she arrived, it was all very normal. She wore jeans and an oversized flannel, her hair tied back in a messy way that made her seem both put together and effortlessly undone. Benji trotted straight to her like he'd been expecting her all along. She knelt without hesitation, ran her fingers through his fur, laughed when he leaned into her shoulder. I watched from the kitchen, leaning against the counter, coffee growing cold in my hands. Something about her felt easy, natural. She didn't fill the silence with noise, but somehow it felt different when she was in the room. Not quieter, just warmer. She took Benji out for a short walk to get a feel for him. I watched them disappear down the street, her stride loose and unhurried, Benji prancing beside her like a much younger dog. I stood by the window longer than I needed to. The street was ordinary, the moment insignificant, but something about it stayed with me. Later, I tried to go back to work. Emails waited, deadlines pressed, but my focus slid. I kept replaying that glimpse of her walking away, the way she moved, the lightness she brought into my apartment without even trying. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just a dog walker, that I was just tired, that I had simply become too accustomed to the quiet, and maybe that's why her presence had stirred something. Still, as I sat at my desk, Fingers idle on the keyboard, I caught myself wondering when she would come back. Not for Benji, but for the space she had left behind. Alex became part of my routine faster than I expected. At first, it was just mornings. She'd arrive around 8, knocking softly before letting herself in. Benji would rush to her, tail sweeping the floor like a metronome of excitement, while I stood in the hallway in a robe, clutching my coffee like armor. She always smiled when she saw me, a kind of open expression that never felt forced. Then she'd disappear with Benji, and the apartment would settle into silence again. But it was different now, not hollow, just paused, like something had walked through and left warmth in its wake. It didn't take long before she started staying longer. First, it was the casual check-ins after the walks, a few minutes sitting cross-legged on the rug while Benji sprawled between us. Then she began showing up in the evenings, too, on days when I texted her, overwhelmed by deadlines and unable to step away. She never hesitated. She arrived exactly when I needed her, like she could sense the unraveling. At some point, I started keeping an extra mug in the cabinet for her. I stocked the pantry with the tea she liked, though she never asked for it. She would make it herself, without comment, humming softly in the kitchen while I tried to finish whatever task had followed me home from work. Her presence calmed me. She didn't demand space or conversation. She just existed beside me, comfortably, like she had always belonged there. Sometimes we'd both sit on the floor, backs against the couch, Benji curled between us like a bridge. She told stories, light, funny, sometimes odd in the best way. I rarely talked as much as she did, but I didn't need to. She filled the space with enough light that I could just listen, could just be. I started to laugh more easily around her, not the polite kind of laugh I used in meetings, but something looser, more honest. There were little things I began to notice. The way her nose scrunched when she was trying to recall something, the way she stretched her legs out when she got too comfortable, her socked feet always nudging my thigh, like gravity couldn't quite keep her to herself. Sometimes her flannel shirt would slip off her shoulder, revealing the soft curve of her collarbone, and I would find my eyes lingering there just a second too long. She never commented on my staring, but she must have noticed. I started looking forward to her visits in a way that felt strange. Not wrong, just new. There was a tug in my chest when I heard her knock, a ripple in my thoughts when I knew she'd be nearby. Her scent, citrus, faint leather, lingered long after she left, like a secret folded into the fabric of my home. When I walked past the spot where she always dropped her bag, something inside me responded. A shift, a low, slow ache that I didn't want to name. Benji was the reason she was here. That fact remained a shield I kept between us. But the longer she stayed, the more that shield weakened. She started bringing things over. Treats for him, a dog brush she liked, a worn paperback she wanted me to read. She left them casually, as if they belonged here, and they began to. The lines between guest and something else blurred slowly, gently, with every shared evening and every quiet morning she walked through the door. There was a night when she sat beside me on the couch after a long walk. Her arm was resting along the back of the cushion, close enough that her fingers brushed my shoulder whenever she moved. We were watching something on TV, something neither of us was really paying attention to. My focus kept slipping to the space between our bodies, small, pulsing, charged. Her thigh pressed against mine for a moment too long, and I didn't move. I should have, but I didn't. Later that night, after she left, I stood in the center of my living room with all the lights off and felt my breath catch in the dark. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Something had changed. It wasn't loud or sudden, but it was real. I had invited her into my life to walk my dog, but now when I thought of her, when I replayed the sound of her laugh or the way her gaze softened when she looked at me, I knew it wasn't just about Benji anymore. She had started to occupy parts of me I thought were long buried, quiet corners I had sealed off in the name of independence, of routine, of safety. And she wasn't just walking through them, she was staying. It began with the smallest of touches, the ones that could still be brushed off as accidental, though I knew deep down they weren't. The brush of her hand against my lower back as she passed behind me in the kitchen, the way her fingers lingered a second longer when she handed me a cup of tea, the fleeting graze of her knee against mine when we sat too close on the couch. These moments threaded themselves into my days quietly, but with growing intensity. They were barely noticeable from the outside, but inside they sparked something unmistakable, a sensation that warmed beneath my skin and made me hyper-aware of every point of contact. My body began to respond to her in ways I couldn't ignore. I would feel her before I saw her, her presence like static in the air, charging everything around us. My breath would catch when she entered a room. My pulse would quicken when she leaned in to show me something on her phone, her shoulder brushing mine. I started to notice the curve of her hips when she moved, the way her shirt lifted slightly when she stretched. I became attuned to the rhythm of her, how she breathed when she laughed, how her voice dropped when she was tired, how her eyes held me a little longer than necessary. There was one evening when we were sitting on the floor again, leaning back against the couch with Benji sprawled between us. The lights were low, the air thick with the scent of her lotion and the fading remnants of dinner. She shifted to get more comfortable, and suddenly her thigh was pressed firmly against mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt the warmth of her skin radiate into me, pulsing gently where we touched. My fingers curled slightly into the carpet, an involuntary response to the rush I felt beneath my ribs. She didn't pull away, neither did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying the contact over and over, dissecting every inch of it, every unspoken word it might have carried. My hand found its way to my own skin, almost absent-mindedly, as if trying to chase the sensation she had left behind. I traced the places she had touched, and the ones I wished she had, my fingers slow and deliberate. My breath came quicker, my thighs tensed, and I closed my eyes to the memory of her, how she looked in that dim light, how her voice felt when it settled low in her throat. I climaxed quietly, pressing my lips together to keep from making a sound, my body curling in on itself in a rush of heat and confusion. Afterward, I lay still in the dark, my skin damp and my thoughts tangled in knots I wasn't ready to untie. She became the landscape of my thoughts. I began to anticipate her voice, her footsteps, the way she would toss her hair back when she laughed. I watched her more openly, my gaze lingering on the exposed line of her neck, the dip of her back when she bent to untangle Benji's leash. I memorized the freckles on her arms, the softness in her eyes when she looked at me without smiling. She left pieces of herself all over my apartment, her hoodie slung over a chair, her charger plugged in next to mine, a half-empty bottle of perfume forgotten on the bathroom counter. Each item felt intimate, a part of her embedded in my space, in my routine, in me. There was a moment when I walked into the living room and found her curled up on the rug reading. Her hair was tied up messily, a few strands falling loose around her face. She wore shorts and one of my sweatshirts, the hem of it slipping just above her thigh. Her bare legs were stretched out in the soft light of the setting sun, and her skin seemed to glow. I stood there for too long, unmoving, my heart hammering in my chest as a deep, aching want settled low in my body. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something that crawled under my skin and took root. Sometimes I caught her looking at me too, her gaze soft but intent, as if she was searching for permission, or maybe for answers. Those glances held weight. They hung in the air between us like unfinished sentences. I wanted to reach for her, to cross the space and press my mouth to hers, to finally give in to everything that had been building. But I didn't. I stayed in the limbo we had created, suspended between friendship and something else, something unspoken but undeniably real. And yet, despite all the restraint, the lines between us had already begun to blur. There were no more walls, just skin, heat, and the silence that vibrated with everything we weren't saying. I wasn't just falling for her, I was unraveling, and she was already under my skin. It happened quietly, like most irreversible things do. There was no grand confession, no carefully lit candlelight evening or orchestrated moment of realization. It was just a night like any other. The air outside was cool, and inside, the apartment was dim, wrapped in that amber stillness that comes only after midnight. We had shared a bottle of wine, one of those reds that made our lips feel warm and our limbs heavy. Benji was asleep in the hallway, his rhythmic breathing like a soft metronome in the silence between us. We were sitting on the couch, legs tucked under us, the kind of closeness that had become so normal it no longer required explanation. But that night, it felt charged, different, as though the space between our bodies had grown thinner, more fragile. Her hand was on the couch cushion beside mine, not touching, but close enough that the air between our fingers felt electric. We weren't speaking. We didn't need to. I could feel the question blooming in my chest like a slow, inevitable pulse, and I sensed the same rhythm in her. I turned my head to look at her, and she was already watching me, her eyes soft and uncertain, but unwavering. There was something inside that gaze that anchored me, a kind of gentle gravity pulling me forward. I moved first. Or maybe it was her. Maybe it was both of us, drawn together like two pieces of a magnet finally close enough to snap into place. My hand brushed hers, then stayed. Her fingers turned toward mine, responding, curling into the spaces like they'd always belonged there. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't nervous. I was aware, acutely, painfully aware of every point of contact, every flicker of sensation. When she leaned in, it felt like the air disappeared between us. Our lips met without hesitation, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, fuller, more certain. Her mouth tasted like wine and something warmer, something I couldn't name but had craved for weeks. Her hand came to rest on my jaw, her thumb brushing along my cheek with impossible tenderness. I felt myself melt into the kiss, my chest pressing into hers, my fingers sliding into her hair. Time collapsed. There was only her breath in my mouth, her skin beneath my fingertips, the quiet tremble that ran through both our bodies. She stood and pulled me with her, our hands still entwined, the kiss never quite breaking. We moved to the bedroom with a kind of unspoken urgency, slow but deliberate, as if we had both decided without speaking that there was no longer a reason to hold back. Clothes slipped off gradually, like petals falling. Her shirt first, revealing a pale line of skin beneath. Then mine, the fabric clinging briefly to my arms before it fell to the floor. We undressed each other carefully, savoring each exposed inch, our eyes tracing every new detail with reverence. She pushed me back onto the bed, crawling over me like the settling of dusk, her thighs straddling mine, her lips trailing along my collarbone. I arched into her, desperate for more of her touch, her weight, her mouth. Her hands found my breasts, her thumbs brushing over sensitive skin until I gasped. Her mouth followed, warm and wet, tongue circling, teasing, worshipping. My hips lifted of their own accord, seeking friction, aching for her. She slid lower, kissing down my stomach with excruciating slowness. Every nerve in my body felt exposed. When her mouth finally reached the space between my thighs, I cried out, my hands fisting into the sheets. Her tongue moved in slow, knowing circles, each flick sending sparks through my spine. My hips moved to meet her, my body trembling under the weight of sensation. I was open, undone, breathless. She held me there, gently, her hands firm on my thighs, guiding me through every wave of release until I shattered beneath her. When I opened my eyes, she was lying beside me, watching. Her fingers brushed across my stomach, tracing patterns I couldn't see, but felt with every cell. I reached for her, pulled her to me, and kissed her again, slow and deep, tasting the heat we had created together. I wanted her closer. I wanted to feel her come apart in my hands the way she had undone me. I slid my hand beneath the waistband of her underwear, my fingers finding her slick, already pulsing. She gasped against my lips, her forehead pressing into mine as I explored her slowly, learning her rhythm, listening to her breath change, the small stutters, the sharp inhales. I kissed her neck, her jaw, her shoulder as I moved faster, deeper, her body trembling under my touch. When she came, it was with a quiet moan pressed against my throat, her nails digging lightly into my back, her body arching into mine like it couldn't get close enough. Afterward, we lay tangled in silence. Her face nestled against my neck, one leg thrown over mine, our skin damp, our hearts still racing. I ran my fingers through her hair, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her body pressed so tightly against mine, it was hard to tell where she ended and I began. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Something had been crossed, something had been claimed, and there was no going back. The quiet in the room wasn't awkward. It was full of meaning, of memory, of the things we had finally allowed ourselves to feel. My body hummed with the echo of her touch, and somewhere deep in my chest, I felt something loosen, a knot I hadn't known I'd been holding, finally untied. This wasn't just release, it was permission to want, to need, to belong. And now that I had touched her, tasted her, held her as close as anyone could, I knew with aching certainty I wouldn't be able to let her go. The morning light crept slowly across the room, casting long golden stripes over the sheets and the floor, brushing over the skin of her bare back with a softness that made my breath catch. I lay still, unmoving, afraid to disturb the fragile quiet that had settled over us like a second blanket. Her body was curled slightly toward me, one arm folded under her head, the other resting across her own waist. The sheet was tangled low around her hips, revealing the graceful curve of her spine and the slope of her shoulder. I let my eyes trace every inch of her, memorizing the rise and fall of her breath, the faint impressions my fingers had left on her skin, the way her hair spilled over the pillow like a question that had been answered in the dark. My own body still carried the echo of her. I felt it in the tenderness between my thighs, in the warmth lingering across my chest where her mouth had moved so reverently hours ago. Every muscle was heavy, loose, humming with the afterglow of what we had shared. I had never known touch like that, so slow, so deliberate, so full. It hadn't been just sex. It had been something else, something deeper and wider, like opening a locked door and stepping into a room I didn't know existed inside me. I felt raw and calm at once, unguarded in a way that made my skin ache not with vulnerability, but with trust. I turned onto my side carefully, not wanting to wake her, though a part of me longed to see her eyes again, the way they had looked at me in the dark, lit from within, focused, tender. I tucked my hand beneath my cheek and studied the line of her neck, the faint shadow of her collarbone, the slight twitch of her fingers as she drifted deeper into sleep. There was something unbearable about how soft she looked, how unprotected, how absolutely real. And in that moment, something shifted in me, not like an epiphany, not like fireworks, but like the steady grounding of a truth that had been slowly blooming beneath the surface. I wanted her in ways that had nothing to do with lust. I wanted the small moments, her laugh when she forgot herself, the way she stirred her tea with a spoon even when it didn't need stirring, the quiet way she reached for my hand without looking. I wanted the sighs between conversations, the warmth of her feet brushing mine under the covers, the scent of her body mixed with my sheets. I wanted the dailiness of her, the repetition, the comfort. She stirred then, her lashes fluttering before she blinked awake slowly, the sleep still soft in her eyes. She didn't speak, didn't smile, but reached out instinctively, her hand resting on my waist as if she needed the confirmation that I was still there. I exhaled quietly, letting my fingers glide over her knuckles, memorizing the way her hand felt against my skin. We stayed like that for a long time, eyes open but silent, as if anything we might say would only distract from the weight of what we had become. Eventually, she sat up, the sheet slipping further, and I watched the muscles of her back shift beneath her skin as she reached for the robe draped over the chair. The mundane motion made something inside me ache. This woman, this body, this quiet morning, all of it so exquisitely simple and yet so terrifyingly important. I followed her to the kitchen, wrapping myself in a blanket, my bare feet cool on the floor. She moved with a kind of sleepy grace, pouring coffee, her fingers steady, even as her shoulders sagged with the comfort of waking. I leaned against the counter, watching her, knowing I'd never look at this kitchen the same again. When she handed me a mug, our fingers brushed, and I felt that same spark, subtle but insistent, like a secret spoken only through skin. We drank in silence, leaning against the counter side by side, the air between us thick with the memory of the night before. I didn't need to ask if it had meant something. I felt it in every quiet gesture, every soft glance, every unhurried breath. The rest of the day unfolded in the gentlest rhythm. She didn't leave. I didn't ask her to stay. She wandered from room to room like she belonged, and I followed her without needing to lead. We did normal things, fed Benji, folded laundry, shared leftovers, but every motion was wrapped in a kind of unbearable tenderness. Her fingers brushed mine when we passed plates. Her body leaned into mine when she reached for something on a high shelf. And every time, my skin lit up like a whisper being spoken directly into my nerves. That night, when we lay down again, it wasn't with hunger, but with reverence. Our bodies found each other like they had been waiting all day. She pulled me close and kissed me slowly, our lips moving in time with the quiet beat of our joined breath. We undressed without rush, revealing skin that was already familiar, but somehow still thrilling. She traced my ribs with her mouth, her tongue soft and deliberate, her hands mapping me with a patience that made my stomach tighten. I felt my body respond, not with urgency, but with surrender. I arched into her touch, not to chase release, but to stay in that sensation as long as I could. When she entered me, her fingers moving deep and slow, I held her gaze, my body trembling with how deeply I felt her. I moved with her, gasping softly as she filled me, as pleasure unfolded like petals under her careful hands. My climax came not in a burst, but in a wave that crested and carried me, my heart pounding, my hands clinging to her arms, her name caught somewhere in my throat. Afterward, She held me against her chest, our breaths mingling, her lips pressed to the crown of my head. I lay there, draped over her, my ear resting above her heart, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel the need to guard myself. I didn't feel the need to run or explain or brace for disappointment. I felt held, seen, known, and it was almost too much to bear. This was not just passion. It was not infatuation. It was the slow, heavy weight of falling into something real, something that demanded to be felt fully, without escape, something that asked me to open, to remain open, even when it was scary, even when it hurt. And I knew, as I fell asleep with her breath warm against my cheek, that I was already too deep to turn back. I didn't want to. I just wanted more of this unbearable, beautiful tenderness. The days began to fold into each other like pages in a well-worn book, soft at the edges, stained with memory. There was no announcement, no line drawn in the sand where one version of us ended and another began. It simply happened. One morning I woke up and she was already in the kitchen humming to herself, barefoot in my oversized sweater, feeding Benji scraps of toast. Another night I found her curled up on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, reading the book she'd left beside my bed days earlier. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like ours. Not in a possessive way, but in the way light settles into a room naturally, filling every corner without asking permission. Her things began to multiply. A second toothbrush appeared beside mine. Her socks found their way into my laundry basket. A bottle of shampoo she liked sat next to mine in the shower. At first, I noticed every new object like it was a confession. Then I stopped noticing it all. Her presence became embedded in the texture of my daily life. Her body in my bed, her voice in my ears, her scent on the pillowcase. Everything began to feel like a continuation, not a change. We moved through the space together as though we had always done it. Morning routines overlapped, brushing teeth at the same sink, trading places at the coffee maker without needing words. She would stand behind me, hands on my waist as I leaned over the counter, and I would feel the quiet hum of her body aligning with mine. In the evenings, we cooked side by side, bumping hips, sharing bites straight from the pan. She would steal the stool by the window while I dried dishes, her bare knees pulled to her chest, watching me with that half smile that made everything inside me go quiet. At night, we touched without urgency. Sometimes we made love with the same intensity as that first night. Bodies entwined, breath shallow, gasps swallowed into each other's mouths. But often it was simpler. She would pull me into her arms, and we would lie skin to skin, breathing the same rhythm, hands wandering lazily, as if reminding each other that this was real, this was happening, this was ours. Her touch no longer felt like an invitation. It felt like home. She had learned my body. The curve of my back, the softness of my thighs, the places where my breath caught and my muscles tensed. Her fingers moved with instinct, with patience. When she kissed my shoulder, I tilted my head to give her more. When she pressed her palm to my stomach and whispered her breath across my collarbone, I arched toward her, open, trusting. We rarely spoke during these moments. The language between us had shifted. Her mouth on my neck, her hand gripping mine, the weight of her thigh over my hip, all of it said what we didn't need to say. There was a night when a storm rolled through. The rain lashed the windows, thunder rumbling somewhere far off. We lay in bed, her body wrapped around mine like protection, her breath warm against my ear. I felt her fingers draw small circles over my ribs. And I thought, without meaning to, that I could live the rest of my life in that exact position. The storm outside faded to nothing compared to the quiet certainty blooming in my chest. I had been waiting for this without realizing it, waiting to be seen, touched, held. not just by someone, but by her. She began to call it home in small, casual ways, asking if we had milk, if we should get new towels, if we could paint the walls. Each time she said we, something shifted in me, warm and anchoring. I stopped bracing for the end. I stopped holding back. One evening, as we folded laundry, I watched her match my socks without thinking, and I felt tears press behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from the unbearable tenderness of being fully known and still chosen. I had spent so long protecting myself from that kind of intimacy. I built my life around control, around silence, around the comfort of distance. But she had walked right through every wall I'd built, not with force, but with presence. She listened to me in the way no one ever had, not just to my words, but to my pauses, my breaths, my movements. She touched me in ways that felt like returning to something I hadn't known I'd lost. There was a morning when I watched her sleep, the sheet tangled around her legs, her hand resting lightly on my stomach. The light spilled in from the blinds, soft and golden, and her face looked so peaceful it made something ache inside me. I reached out and traced the shape of her knuckles, her cheek, the small scar on her chin, and I thought, not for the first time, that loving her wasn't something I did. It was something I had become. I no longer thought about the day she'd stop coming. I no longer flinched at the thought of dependence. She wasn't an intrusion in my life. She was my life. Her laugh, her footsteps, her skin pressed against mine in the early hours before dawn. I carried her inside me now, not just in memory or desire, but in rhythm. She had become part of my breath, part of my bones. When she touched me, I didn't just feel pleasure. I felt known. I felt safe. I felt like I had come home to a place I hadn't realized I was searching for. This love was not loud. It didn't need declarations or labels. It lived in gestures, in the way she brushed my hair behind my ear when I was tired, in the way I curled around her at night, instinctively, without thought, in the silence we shared, full and tender, as we moved through each day not as two, but as one. She had entered my world through a leash and a dog in a simple act of convenience, but she had stayed in ways I couldn't have imagined. She didn't just belong in my apartment or my bed. She belonged inside me, in the folds of my breath, the quiet hum of my thoughts, the pulsing beat of my heart. I didn't need to say the word love to know what this was. She was my home. And now I carried that home inside my body everywhere I went.